And for the third block of this presentation, I will invite Carole Leroy, who will lead a panel on the challenges of open data for different organizations. Welcome, Carole.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. My name is Carole Leroy. I'm an executive VP at Veneo. I'm also one of the co-founders. Veneo is now part of the GFT Technologies company, which is a global company committed to the digital transformation of the financial sector. I'm also the lead of the Center of Innovation and Performance in Insurance that we have in Quebec City. But like Eric, I like Montreal too. In this center, we make different things like remote development, but we are passionate about innovation. And the innovation team in this center put in place the process, the InnoCase process that was defined by Eric earlier in this talk. So that's the way we are working with insurance company and InsurTech to develop business value from the innovation. So I'm glad to be here and act as a moderator for this panel. So first of all, let me introduce the different panelists. So Jonathan Larsen. Jonathan is the Chief Innovation Officer of, yes? Oops, sorry. Chief Innovation Officer of Ping An. Jonathan, can you introduce yourself?
Very good. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here and opportunity to participate on the panel. For those of you who don't know, Ping An is a very large, diversified financial company in China with insurance at its core, a very deep technology company, and a company that has been very successful in building new generation businesses. By market cap, it's the largest insurance company in the world. And I'll give some numbers probably through my comments to give you some more context. I have two roles at the company. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer, and secondly, I run a fund called the Ping An Global Voyager Fund, which is a $1 billion corporate venture capital fund focused on fintech and digital health. And it is designed to extend the range of capabilities that Ping An has access to globally to support its business activities.
Thank you, Jonathan. As a second speaker, we have Louis Regimbal, VP of Strategy and Innovation at SSQ Insurance. Welcome, Louis. Can you introduce yourself?
With pleasure. So thank you very much, Carole. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm very, very happy to be here and represent not only SSQ, but a broader set of insurance companies in Canada on this topic. I've been at SSQ for 2 years now. I'm in the role of Vice President of Strategy and Innovation, so leading all the corporate strategy efforts and also having a key role in terms of the cultural shift that where we are going to put innovation at the heart of much of what the organization is trying to do. And I have a long management consulting background, having worked with many insurance companies in Canada and Europe over the years.
Thank you, Louis. And the third one is Edouard Ferron-Mallett from Mr. Young. So Mr. Young is one of the solutions used in the solution that you just saw before. Welcome, Edouard. Can you introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Carole, for having me. It's quite an honor to be here. So Mr. Young is a conversational agent powered by artificial intelligence to help people cope with anxiety. We started this company 2 years ago, and we've been working with research centers in psychology and artificial intelligence in order to bring solutions through chatbots and innovative ways to prevent anxiety disorders to happen.
Great, thank you very much. We really like this panel to be interactive, and we want you to be part of the discussion. So you can use your smartphone, and in the FinTech application, if you use the home button, you'll be able to see one poll for this specific session. So you will see the date, October 31st, and the InsurTech panel. So if you go there, you will be able to vote for your preferred question. But just to set the table and to give you a few minutes to vote, I will ask an opening question to all of our panelists. And this question is, do you use open data in your companies? So Jonathan, would you start?
The answer is, of course we do. We are an extremely data-intensive company. So we have about 180 million financial services customers, and within our broader ecosystem of digital platforms, we have just under 500 million consumers within our sort of client base or digital user base. A very good example I can give you is that the Chinese government has an ID card system, and it basically has a face database of everybody in China. So we build our own facial recognition tools, and for every time we need to authenticate somebody, we match their face against the government database. That's a public API.
Wow.
And surprisingly, it exists in many countries, but we see very few companies taking advantage of it. And we have a 99.8% match. So you just take that, you combine it with a few other pieces of data around the client, and you've essentially eliminated identity fraud. So that's one very specific example, but we are constantly combining data from all kinds of sources, whether they be public sources, like the one I just mentioned, whether they be social network, chat, search, retail partners, our own ecosystem partners, with data that clients have entrusted us with about themselves. And we are able to create inferences, do analysis to create better value propositions or lower cost solutions. So maybe just one other example that we use pretty regularly is that in China it's very hard to validate address. So we're onboarding about 25, 30 million clients a year. And in China there are no utility bills. Everything is direct debit to your account. And if you have an ID card, it probably has the address where you grew up as opposed to the current address, just the way the system works. So one thing we do if we're in doubt is we seek the client's permission to track them on their phone. And if we can see through GPS and geolocation that they spend 7 hours a night where they say they live, we are likely to believe that that's where they live, as an example. So there are many, many techniques that we use, of course with client permission and with protecting full client confidentiality to be able to triangulate the information we need to be able to do business.
Great. Louis?
So, in advance of this panel discussion, I decided to survey a few of my peers, a very informal, non-scientific survey of other insurance companies in Canada to find out what they were doing with open data. So I had about six respondents. So, the overwhelming theme was really the notion of experimentation. So if we're thinking about, and I'm being very specific around the notion of open data, as we define it, free, readable, easily accessible, and so on. So there's a notion of experimentation out there where a lot of people are trying different, putting together different solutions. Many of them are, first of all, the preferred source of data for these experimentations is really government-issued data, which there's a sense of, integrity, it's safe, we're not really taking a big risk by using it. And in a lot of cases, the use of the data in these experiments is really for a form of greater good. So there's an insurance company that is right now working on determining what are the safe pedestrian routes for children walking to school in the Toronto region. So these kinds of projects are things that we're seeing a good deal of it. Another one that I think that we're looking at, some players are looking at the notion of individual quotes. So how do we, provide a quote a lot easier or with a lot more, a greater degree of certainty around the information. But I think ultimately, I think we have to acknowledge that it's still early days and there's a bit of fumbling around in the dark still going on.
Cool. Edouard?
Well, when you're a startup, at the beginning you have limited resources and data is key. So you have to use open data, but just as Jonathan was saying, it's not just open data, it's public data and private data. So we went along with all of these as we grew. We started with open data that was available to get our first hands on the algorithms and what we could be doing in understanding, for instance, the symptoms or the ways that people express their anxiety or new life events. And then afterwards we moved on to some public and private data that we had to clean and annotate. And we managed to quickly, even from a technical standpoint, in our solution, also integrate open data. For instance, on the Facebook chatbot, we can collect very, very limited public information, but about your age, your gender, your city, your location, and from there we can afterwards try to personalize the experience that you will have. So yeah, we've been combining open data with public data, using competitions as well that have open data sets. So this has been a great work with open and public data.
Great, thank you. So I hope everybody had the time to vote on the different question. So let's take a look at the different question that we had on the survey. So I read them. So do you plan to use AI to cross-check your internal data with public data? With the first question. The second one was, how do you deal with issues of consent and confidentiality with open data? The third one was, are your insurance company ready to use open data in the same mindset that described by Benjamin that you should give if you want to get? And the last one is, what is the legitimacy of the source of data? And the second question was selected by the public. So how do you deal with the issues of consent and confidentiality with the open data? Jonathan, do you want to start?
Look, to me, this whole issue is an evolving story, and what we're talking about is the set of data that we care about today is just a subset of what's going to be relevant in 2 years' time and in 5 years' time. And just bear in mind that the iPhone, or the smartphone as we know it, came out, when was it? 2007. And with that came an explosion of locational data and behavioral data and interaction data, all kinds of things that simply didn't exist before. And it's not unreasonable to assume that that's sort of the exponential pace of data creation is going to continue. So I think this question becomes more complicated and more challenging over time. However, I think that consumers do understand that their service providers need data and possess a lot of data. And there's a trade-off that every consumer makes implicitly or explicitly. And look, it may have been a surprise to some people to learn that Facebook actually knows that we're all in this room and that we're all together, assuming that we're Facebook users. That's just a reality of the digital world that we're in today. You can opt out of it by just shutting down your accounts. But if you're not going to do that, what you're really relying on is each organization's set of principles and their willingness to work by an agreement with you individually, and obviously a set of legal frameworks in each jurisdiction that fundamentally protects people's data and makes sure it's not abused and misused. So for us, it's a fundamental issue. It's interesting in the China context because I think it's probably fair to say that both in substance and by reputation, there's probably more extensive availability of data in China than most other jurisdictions. And there's, I think, a misconception that it's kind of a Wild West and you can do whatever you like. What's interesting in China is that the Chinese privacy ordinances are converging very, very rapidly with what you would be familiar here in Canada, with GDPR in Europe, with what's in the United States and Australia and elsewhere. And the last thing that Chinese regulators want is to be completely out of step with the rest of the world, because that fundamentally affects the portability of business models and the interactability of essentially elements of the Chinese economy with the rest of the world. So this is very important for them, and I think that so for an organization like us, it's really critical that we have a very clear understanding with our customers as to what data we're getting and what we're doing with it and what limitations we place upon ourselves in handling that data responsibly. And I think that's probably no different from any other large service organization in the digital world.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So to build on everything that Jonathan has talked about, and in the context of what the experimentation or the InnoCase led to, where there's a there's a healthcare component to it. I think obviously we as a company, as an industry, we will comply to the regulators' wishes around a use of confidentiality and data and so on. And I'm going to argue that that's the easy part. The more complicated part is doing that and ensuring and maintaining the trust of our customers through that process. Because, to build on what Jonathan said, when certain individuals give consent to the use of their data, that consent may not be explicit in their mind. It may be implicit in the fact that they've ticked on, I agree to the terms and usage or whatever. So as an organization, we don't want to put that trust at risk and then point to the fine print as being really, the reason why we're doing things. The other aspect, I think, that's very important here is that people think of their financial data and their health data in very different ways. And so obviously when it comes to financial data, we have a broader context around banking and wealth management. And the health data, in terms of the insurance environment, we're very careful about how we think of it. So it's this notion we're going to be moving forward, but very gradually, and ensuring that we can build on the trust, maintain the trust or build the trust component with the customers.
Totally agree. Edouard?
Yeah, that's
your
very.
take on that?
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with both your points, and especially as you mentioned, in the healthcare data has definitely brought up some issues in terms of consent and confidentiality from the get-go. So when we were talking about mental health data through conversation, how could we find some open data related to this where there had been consent and confidentiality approved? This has been one of our biggest challenge at first. And so given that we were a startup as well, we could actually have the agility to take privacy by design in building our solutions and building our infrastructures. So in the day that we do provide some data outside of our company, we will have made all the work to make sure that the users had informed consent about how the data was used, to what extent, how it will be personalized and anonymized, and maintain this trust with the users and the different clients. And as well for the open data that we would collect, so that we would use and that would train our algorithms, we did try to put in place a methodology or a way for us to validate that the open data available had all of its legitimacy and quality on these levels.
Great. Do you have time to take a second one? Yes? Yeah. Do you have the result? So it would be the third question. So are your insurance company ready to open their data? So Jonathan, I hope so.
Yeah, look, I think that Portage had an interesting event last night, and we had a speaker from the UK talking about open banking in that context. And he made the comment that in the UK, open banking has come about by regulation. In the United States, it has come about through market forces and market collaboration. And I think that there is a path in every market where opening up data such that aggregators, for example, can play a role, or that sourcing platforms, let's say a Credit Karma or someone like that in the United States context, or any of the insurance marketplace platforms in the insurance context, are able to operate. So such things do operate in places like China. So certainly some of our data is accessible, obviously with customer permission. So we don't have any in principle issue with that whatsoever. We have a platform, not in insurance, but in wealth management called Lufax, where we're actually an aggregator for hundreds of providers of financial services, ranging from loans to a very wide range of wealth management products. So this concept is extremely familiar to us in that context as well. So as a matter of principle, we are absolutely open to this. I think the other context of this is ecosystems. So we've seen our business move from being a proprietary product-led business over 30 years to being a service and relationship business, to being in the last decade a technology-enabled business, and now we think of it as sort of an ecosystem-driven business. And we need to, and we do, insert ourselves into various online or digital ecosystems. One that I can give an example of, there are some obvious examples that were on some of the slides earlier. People like search companies like Baidu in China, the equivalent of Google, or Alibaba or Tencent in retail and in social network respectively. We own a platform called Auto Home in China. It's the largest auto website in China. And what that really is a site where people go to explore the type of car they want to buy. And typically a buyer will spend 2 or 3 weeks looking at different options on that site before they make a decision. That site is responsible for about 30% of car sales in China. And it's a listed company on the NASDAQ. It's a $10 billion company. So it's quite a significant thing. But that creates a whole wealth of interaction opportunities for us. And what we've done is, as we acquired the company 2 years ago, we've layered in financial services, insurance, loans, credit cards, and so forth. And it's impossible to do that without an API model back to our source businesses. So that ecosystem context, which we see as very much the forefront of our business strategy on pretty much every front, it's essentially an API-led business opportunity.
Absolutely. Louis, how do you see this openness in the Quebec
in the Quebec and Canada, Carole? So just taking a different tact on this, in terms of making data available, I mean, beyond what the things that Jonathan talked about, through aggregators and things of that nature. I think the other thing that we're looking at right now is, as we try and understand the value of our data, or how we can use it and how we can benefit from it, or what it's telling us, I mean, I think we would be open, and we are, actively consider things like putting specific anonymized data sets in environments like, I'm going to pick Kaggle as an example, where we can allow other people to, and maybe put out some challenges and so on, and what, can you help us extract value from this data? And so that's something that we're definitely actively considering. I'm not going to say that we've done it yet, but it's an example. And also some of that, we're also collaborating with a number of universities, actively with the Université de Laval, and also with the Vado group, based out of HEC, where we're going to make a lot of our data available for them to play around with. And so that's a little bit it's an example of how we're thinking about it right now. But I think that we acknowledge that we cannot get around, or we cannot get away from this idea of, giving in order to receive. Yeah.
Thank you. So Edouard, you're not in an insurance company, but do you see some insurance company open to open their data to your solution?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's different ways where we can partner with insurance companies to leverage some of the data and provide some new tools, some predictive tools on that end. I know that here in Montreal, Desjardins has done some work as well with open data cubs that they have worked a bit like what you were mentioning with Kaggle, and providing some anonymized open data sets. That's one of the ways that we can see working with them. And I know that us as well as a company, we are definitely open to, ready to open our data. Actually, it's in the same form of those competition where you provide an open data set which is anonymized. We started with open data by building, through a challenge of building a knowledge graph for mental health with an open data set. Today, we are, actually it's in 2 weeks, on November 11th, we're providing a mandate to Concordia students to build a knowledge graph as well around anxiety and being able to answer some questions around this. And we'll provide them with an open data set. And definitely in the future, with the permission of our users, of course, and keeping this transparency and ethical attitude on it, we will look into ways of providing some open data sets for research, development, and other applications for good, notably.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a pleasure to be with you on this stage this morning. Thank you, everybody, to listen to us. If you want to have more chat with the panelists, or even the presenter, or the team who was part of the InsurTech, the Insure story that we made together, you can visit us at the booth 35, correct? So thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Good to meet you.